In September 1991, the music industry looked a certain way. Hair metal ruled the charts, big production, big hair, big budgets. Labels knew what sold and they were very good at selling it. Then a video appeared on MTV. A janitor mopping a gym floor, a pep rally descending into chaos, a band playing in the middle of it. And within 48 hours everything had changed. Not gradually, not over months, overnight. Smells Like Teen Spirit did not nudge popular music in a new direction. It kicked the door down and walked through it. And the man who wrote it was already uncomfortable about what he'd done before the song had even finished charting. Kurt Cobain grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, a small logging town on the coast of the Pacific Northwest where it rains for most of the year, and there isn't a great deal to do. He had a difficult childhood by any measure. His parents divorced when he was 8. He moved between relatives. He felt profoundly out of place in a town that valued toughness and conformity, and had little patience for a sensitive artistic kid who was already obsessed with music. What Aberdeen gave Cobain was a bone-deep understanding of alienation, of feeling like an outsider in your own life, of wanting something more without being able to articulate what that something was. Those feelings never left him, even after he was famous, even after he was rich, even after millions of people were telling him he'd perfectly captured something universal about their own experience. He still felt like the kid from Aberdeen who didn't fit anywhere. That feeling is in Smells Like Teen Spirit from the very first note. The song doesn't sound like it was made by someone who belonged. It sounds like it was made by someone who very much didn't, and who had found, in that not belonging, something worth saying. Cobain has given slightly different accounts of how Smells Like Teen Spirit came together, but the consistent thread is this. He was trying to write a Pixies song. Specifically, he was trying to capture the quiet, loud, quiet dynamic that the Pixies had perfected, the way their songs would drop to near silence and then explode back into noise. He admired it, wanted to try it, and sat down with a guitar and a chord progression and worked at it until something clicked. The chord sequence itself, F-sharp, B, A, E, is not complicated. Cobain admitted that the opening riff shares DNA with More Than a Feeling by Boston, a connection he found both amusing and slightly embarrassing. What he did with those chords though, the way the quiet verse gives way to the roaring chorus, the way the dynamic shift hits you physically every single time, turns something simple into something that felt like a force of nature. He wrote the basic structure in around 20 minutes. Nevermind was recorded at Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, California, with producer Butch Vig in the spring of 1991. Vig had worked with Nirvana before on earlier demos, and understood both what the band were capable of, and what they needed to sound like at full power. The recording of Smells Like Teen Spirit was not straightforward. Cobain was a perfectionist in the studio despite, or perhaps because of, the roughness he wanted in the finished sound. Vig pushed him toward clarity and precision, without sanitizing the rawness. The famous guitar tone, that specific combination of distortion and weight, went through multiple iterations before it sounded right. Chris Novoselick's bass is lower in the final mix than many listeners realize. It's doing enormous structural work underneath the guitars without drawing attention to itself. Dave Grohl's drumming is, as always, the engine of the whole thing. Powerful but controlled, never tipping into chaos even when everything around it is screaming. DGC Records received the finished album and immediately saw the potential. They invested heavily in promotion and the video, a budget that would have been unthinkable for an alternative rock band 12 months earlier. The industry was betting on Nirvana. They had no idea quite how right that bet would turn out to be. The title Smells Like Teen Spirit has one of the best origin stories in rock history, and it is almost entirely deflating. Kathleen Hanna, singer of the Riot GRRRL band Bikini Kill and a friend of Cobain's, spray-painted the words "Kurt smells like Teen Spirit" on his wall one night. Teen Spirit was a deodorant brand, popular among teenage girls, and Hannah was making a joke about Cobain smelling like his then-girlfriend who wore it. Cobain heard something else in the phrase. He thought it sounded like a revolutionary slogan, a rallying cry. He didn't know it was a deodorant reference until after the song was already a hit. And even then, it didn't bother him. The meaning he had projected onto the phrase, that sense of youthful energy, of something indefinable but urgent, was the meaning the song had taken on regardless of where the words came from. The video for Smells Like Teen Spirit was directed by Samuel Bayer and shot in 2 days at GMT Studios in Culver City, California. The concept, a high school pep rally descending into anarchic chaos, was Cobain's own. He wanted the cheerleaders to have anarchist symbols on their uniforms. He wanted the janitor to keep mopping while everything fell apart around him. He wanted it to feel like an institution consuming itself from within. MTV aired it in heavy rotation from late September 1991, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The channel's request lines lit up, record shops reported queues. Nevermind had been projected to sell 250,000 copies, a strong performance for an alternative rock record. It sold 400,000 in its first week. Within 3 months, it had displaced Michael Jackson's Dangerous at #1 on the Billboard charts. By early 1992, Kurt Cobain was one of the most famous people on Earth, and he was finding it almost unbearable. The scale of Nirvana's success had outrun anything he had imagined or wanted, and the song at the center of it, the song everyone was singing, the song that defined the moment, was one he had written in 20 minutes as a simple exercise in dynamics. He began introducing Smells Like Teen Spirit at concerts with sarcastic comments. He talked about it in interviews with increasing weariness. He resented the way it had become a stadium anthem, the way it was used in contexts that felt entirely contrary to what he thought the song was about. He had written something that felt like his, personal, specific, the product of a particular feeling in a particular moment, and it had become everyone's in a way that made it feel like nobody's. This is a tension that many artists encounter, but few encounter at the scale Cobain did, or as quickly. The song that makes you famous is rarely the song you want to be defined by. Cobain's problem was that Smells Like Teen Spirit had become definitional, not just for him, but for an entire cultural moment. There was no separating himself from it without separating himself from everything. Smells Like Teen Spirit has now been streamed billions of times. It appears regularly in polls of the greatest songs ever recorded, sometimes at #1. It has been covered by artists from every conceivable genre, including a string quartet version, a jazz version, and a version by Paul Anka in a big band style that is either brilliant or baffling depending on your point of view. Every few years a new generation discovers it, and has the same response the first generation had, that physical jolt, that sense of something enormous arriving. The song doesn't age in the way that most pop music ages because it was never really about a specific moment. It was about a feeling that is permanent, the feeling of being young and alienated and full of energy that has nowhere to go. Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic still perform it occasionally, at tribute events and special occasions. Kurt Cobain wrote Smells Like Teen Spirit trying to be the Pixies. He ended up being Nirvana, which turned out to be considerably more consequential. He used a chord progression he borrowed from Boston, a title he misunderstood as a rallying cry, lyrics he admitted were half nonsense, and he made something that a generation immediately recognized as entirely their own. There is a lesson in that about the nature of artistic intention, about the gap between what you think you are making and what you actually make. Cobain thought he was writing a throwaway pop exercise. He wrote the defining song of his decade and one of the most recognized pieces of music in the history of recorded sound. He never made peace with that, but the song doesn't need him to. Here we are now, entertain us.